If you put everything that Ukraine has done in terms of drone attacks, ATACMS attacks over the last week, that doesn't even begin to match what Russia can do in one single day to Ukraine and does on multiple days. And even when Russia does that on multiple days, it does not put the Ukraine itself into a fetal position where they're crying for mercy. Stop it. We can't stand it anymore. They persist. The one thing I've always wondered, I'm not privy to the Russian General Staff calculations. I wonder why, at the outset, they didn't blow every single bridge over the Dnieper River. In other words, cut off the ability of Ukraine in the west to resupply troops in the east. Because if you take down the land routes, if you take down those railroad routes, then how are you going to sustain an army of 100,000, 200,000 guys out in the field?
Fair question.
So the only thing I can come up with is that part of the Russian General Staff's plans, the reason they haven't, is because they intend to use those bridges. That's their eventual intent. They don't want to have to destroy them and then rebuild them. They want to have them intact so that they can use them when they cross the Dnieper. And they're going to
I've heard that before, but I think that's it. If that is what their thinking was, I think that was a really bad choice because the price they have paid for now nearly 3 years has been extraordinary. And the chances that the Ukraine side would go over those bridges and not blow them themselves to prevent that very thing, I think is pretty high. So that's a bad calculation if it was.
And that's why I'd love to get them to sit down and say, hey, explain this to me. How does this? How does this work? What's your thinking? Now, the reality is, from Media Zona, their casualty count, Russian casualties have actually been declining significantly over the last 4 months, even though the fighting has intensified. And part of that is attributed to the fact that Ukraine increasingly is deploying people to the front lines that don't know how to shoot and how to operate artillery and mortars. And tanks.
Yeah. Listen, let me tag on that. Let me jump right in on that because I got information just this morning from someone who has direct contacts with people on the line on the Ukraine side, and they were talking about for OPSEC. They waited a while to reveal this, but when Vuhledar fell, whatever it was, a month and a half ago or so, or a month or so. They said that the Ukraine side was really upset at Syrskyi and the general staff because they said that they had been begging for supplies. They said they had a great position, had held up for a year and a half on this, and the terrain was to their advantage in their favor, but they needed more supplies, more ammunition, and certainly more support as well, none of which they got. And then apparently in the 11th hour, they got 3 battalions of people who were not trained in that kind of fighting, had no experience, and they didn't know how to do that stuff. And so most of them gave up. Most of them quit when they came in there. And then, of course, then the whole thing fell apart. I doubt that's an isolated situation, and it's going to continue to impose itself.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that goes back to, you and I both have been on the same sheet of music for a long while, that trained manpower is the heart and soul of any effective military organization. And when you're talking trained manpower, you're not just talking corporals and privates, you're talking an intact group of non-commissioned officers, the various flavors of sergeants that staff and chief warrant officers, and then as well as seasoned officers that have had some kind of command and that they know how to, as you know in your experience, a good officer is somebody who actually listens to suggestions from a senior NCO, particularly if that officer has, there are a lot of staff sergeants that have saved a lot of captains' asses over throughout history,
I can remember Sergeant May that saved my butt a lot of times when I was a major, not XO of a CAP squadron. So I'm right with you.
Yeah. So, and how do you get that? Well, that's nothing that you go out and do in a 13-week recruiting process.
Right.
That's something that's developed over time, and you've got to have the elements in place so that you can replace, because there will be losses in combat. And the United States didn't. I'm not even sure we really learned that lesson in World War II, because our losses were so low compared to what Russia did.
Yeah.
Russia learned that lesson. And that's one of the things I think we also fail to take into account when doing the analysis of the Russian military. The Russian people culturally understand what war is and what the terrible losses are, because almost every family lost one or more family members in that war. Whereas in the United States, the number of American families that were grieving the loss of a son, because I mean, the reality, most of the people that were killed in war in the U.S. military were men, not women. We're very few. We had the numbers ranged between 350 and 470. And what I find shocking is even to this day, the Department of Defense does not have a good solid number on what the actual number of KIA were in World War II.
Yeah, they usually say it's around 400,000.
Yeah, but when
total,
you look
total deaths, not just KIA.
So when you look at the the comparative population size, Russia lost twice that many soldiers in just the Battle of Stalingrad.
Yeah,
that's what we lost in all of World War II. And anybody that's seen the Clint Eastwood movie Flag of Our Fathers about the guys that raised the flag on Iwo Jima, and how the American public was growing tired of the war and they needed to get out there and use these we really hadn't suffered as a country, and yet we were then sucking air during that generation. Today, we have never, the people of the United States have never tasted the bitter pill of war. Yes. And the sacrifice that comes with it and the loss of life that comes with it. And so that's why we're so cavalier in going to war. Well, that doesn't cost us anything. In fact, we make money off of it.
Listen, and I want to end on that subject or that topic rather in a slightly different way. So we can agree that however hard, however complex, easy, long, whatever, eventually there will be a negotiated settlement. All wars eventually end. This one certainly will too. And so we'll probably talk in the new year, especially as it gets closer to January 20th, how the Trump administration may actually conduct these and how the negotiations may go, et cetera. But I want to end on something that I think is on a longer term scale, possibly far more consequential negatively for us. And that is, as you talked about a little bit at various points during this episode here, about how, whether it's the Abrams or the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the F-16s, et cetera, how they haven't made a whole lot of difference on the battlefield. They've all been relatively neutralized. Talk about, for the remainder of the time we have here, on how you view the potential risk to American national security as a result of all of our weapon systems having been put out there and field tested so that the enemy can figure ways to defeat them or mitigate them if we then at some point have to fight a war conventionally with any major power, be it China, Russia, whatever.
Well, our weapons system design is not integrated with a strategic vision. And Andrei Martyanov, who's been on your show several times, he's written 4 terrific books. And the very first book he came out with 7 years ago, Losing Military Supremacy. I really encourage folks, if you're looking for a late Christmas gift, buy that, read it, and give it to your friends. But what Andrei points out is that the Russians, in contrast to the United States, when they're developing weapon systems that are designed to be integrated into a national defense strategy of protecting the Russian homeland from an invasion from outside. Whereas what the United States has relied upon is this nuclear triad, really, where we can project force through the Navy and project force through the air with our Air Force. But our ground combat capability really is somewhat limited. We're an expeditionary military force. Well, what has been exposed now over the course of the war, both in Ukraine and in the Middle East, is that one, the United States does not have any kind of supremacy when it comes to air defense systems. Our air defense systems don't work. They suck. They get defeated easily with strategic systems that Russia has deployed.
And I'm sorry, let me just caveat a piece in there, because I just got an email yesterday from Professor Ted Postel of MIT. We'll be doing a show in the new year where he is going to make the case that he's going to show physical evidence from 1991 and from 2024 to where there has been almost no advance in the capacity of our PAC systems to intercept enemy incoming missiles. So we've been very static, and it's been static low at that. So what you're saying is even more right than I think people realize.
Well, we saw just the other day in Israel where the Houthis fired apparently what's been described as a hypersonic ballistic missile that Israel failed to shoot down. And we saw two of the air defense systems go up one after another trying to shoot it down, and they failed. I thought that Iron Dome was impregnable. Well, a little bit pregnant.
Single missile. It wasn't even part of a barrage that maybe the numbers weren't there. It was one missile and it got through.
Yeah, so that's so what we're looking at is both this combination of failure to develop weapon systems that are cost effective, that can be easily replaced. Because look at the F-35. Right now, the last number I saw on that, both the cost of production and the cost of operation is something like $200 million a copy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane. Per piece. And then when it was Matt Gaetz that exposed that only like 29% were combat ready. Similarly, as we've seen what the Houthis have demonstrated to the U.S. Navy, what the limits are of U.S. ability to project naval power. 30 years ago, we could sell the Carrier Task Force Group in, and man, we were a tough customer to deal with. Today, when someone like the Houthis can have a hypersonic missile that can penetrate our air defense system around those carriers, and the cruisers and destroyers that are there to try to provide a shield fail. And we saw just the other day that we shot down. We're still not sure if we shot down our own F-18 or if the Houthis did it. But regardless, an F-18 went into drink. Fortunately, the two pilots were not killed. But what has been exposed is that the United States has an extremely expensive, not easy to replace equipment, and it doesn't meet the current technical requirements of the battlefield. Which, like I said, Russia in their flexibility, they're able to crank out tanks, they're able to crank out hypersonic missiles, the Iskanders, for example, but and the Kinzhals. But at the same time, they've been able to really shift direction and start mass producing drones, and they're getting drones as well out of Iran, and so they're not stuck. In the process of doing this, their biggest problem is a manpower shortage because everybody's got full employment in Russia. Their economy's not hurting, and people got plenty of money to go buy goods in the shops. So the problem, the challenge the United States faces is we are still locked into a 20th century mentality.
Yeah, that's so true.
And we have not caught up to the 21st, and it's probably we're not going to catch up until we get defeated in a war.
Right.